Hello! Welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be talking about middle grade series that I loved as a middle grader. These were the books that I read before I really got into the world of young adult. To be young, idealistic me, just reading the days away. So from these series you'll be able to tell the things that child me just ate up, such as fantasy, humor, wit, and a little bit of anthropomorphic characters, especially cats. And spoilers, I still have great love for cat characters. So some of these series I fell harder for than others, and some of them I haven't read in a while, so my synopsis might either be straight from the books, straight from Goodreads, or just something that I made up. We might as well get started. First up on the list, Artemis Fowl series by Colfer. So as you can see, I actually started reading this series at the library, so I have a kind of weird mix of book covers. I know, annoying, isn't it? So the first book I bought later because it was really hard to find one of these at a used bookstore. So these are the new covers. It's weird because the first and seventh book I have the new covers for, but then all the other books I was able to find secondhand with the old covers. So there are 8 books in this series, and I've read all 7 of them except for the 8th one. I have to do a reread of the series before I can read the 8th one. So this series follows a young millionaire genius boy named Artemis Fowl, there's a pun on his last name, Fowl, who becomes enmeshed with the fairy world, and especially early on in the series he's very interested in finding his lost father. As the synopsis says, these aren't the fairies of bedtime stories. These fairies are armed and dangerous. As the series progresses, Artemis Fowl actually does get older. He starts out as a 12-year-old, which was perfect for a little 7-year-old me to read, because I was like, it was very hard to find child characters back then that were like unabashedly morally gray or even labeled as the villains, and Artemis Fowl definitely starts out as someone who's very morally gray. Really cool thing about this series for children is that there's a code at the bottom of the first book, and this is actually mentioned in the novel. It's called the People Code. He spends a large part of the book cracking this code, and I remember reading this and being really excited about cracking the code, and I actually wrote out the whole sequence of the code at the bottom, and then I figured out the alphabet myself, only to find out that later there was an alphabet already available on Eoin Colfer's website. Talk about disappointment, but I was still pretty proud of myself that I cracked this code. There's a movie coming out by Disney, and I looked at the trailer and I definitely don't think it follows the book. So just like the really sad Percy Jackson movies, I think Disney sugar-coated the real nuance of this book. So next up on list of books that I loved as a kid, we have the Magic series. I only have the first 4 books here, but it's actually a 7-book series, which that number is pretty iconic because the first book starts off introducing you to one of the main characters of the series, Septimus Heap, who is the 7th son of the 7th son. This is one of the series that's definitely written for the younger edge of the middle grade. It says 9 to 12, but it's actually, you could even read this as a 7 or 8-year-old, which I did. The story starts out with Septimus Heap being born, pronounced dead, and then stolen the same night he's born. Now the Heap family actually find a young baby girl in the snow that very same night that Septimus Heap is stolen, and they decide to bring her up with the rest of their sons. This is honestly a very fun read. It's a great introduction into reading fantasy as a young kid. Now I've only have the first 4 books in the series, so I can't attest to the other 7, but I'm pretty sure, if my memory stands correct, that I actually read all 7 books in the series. Next up we have the Skulduggery Pleasant series. So I actually came across this book rather randomly. At my school, I was looking for a new book to read, and I found this book. It had a different cover on the front, but I was immediately intrigued by the fact that there was a skeleton as the main character. This is a really large book series. I think there's about 11 to 15 books in this series. I've only read the first 3, but from what I can remember, I really enjoyed it. This is actually a kind of a hard series for me to find because I don't even think my library has all of the books, and it's not really super popular now, I don't think, so it's really hard to find all the books. I picked these up at a secondhand bookstore. There's so much wit and heart even in the first book of the series, which got me really interested. I loved Skulduggery Pleasant. He's obviously the skeleton, but I also really love the main character, Stephanie. She's so stubborn and strong. In the first book, her uncle dies, and she immediately inherits his really large estate and much of his money. And it's just really interesting as she enters this world of magic Basically, it's a little bit of a coming-of-age book, because I think she starts out only being like 12 or 13 years old in this. Skulduggery is really great because not only is he a skeleton, but he's a wise, cracking detective. So that's right, even though he died long ago, his bones are still shaking. I don't know why I said that. Please just ignore that happened. My next favorite book series was The Guardians of GaHoole. If you don't know what this book series is about, there's about 16 books out now, and it surrounds stories and adventures of these anthropomorphic owls. So this is the first book. It's called The Capture, and it starts out introducing you to a character named Soren, who basically has just been born and is learning how to live his owl life. Well, one night he gets thrown out of the nest, gets kidnapped and abducted by a mysterious owl organization. So I thought the series was really good because not only does it have so much adventure and action, but it also brings up some important points. A lot of the medieval characters in the novel kind of spout this weird racial purity thing, not unlike Nazism. And also, it's interesting because the different breeds of owls, that's how they measure their racial purity. So I think it brings up some important topics in a middle grade series, but it also has so much action and fantasy elements to it that it's really intriguing for the young reader. Especially near the second or third book, Soren makes it to the Great GaHoole tree, which is where he has learned all these legends about these great warriors, and he kind of enters kind of like a Hogwarts education, but it's owl-based, so the series doesn't just follow Soren. Eventually it follows all of these other different characters of the series, but these are my two favorite books from the series because I just really like the idea of an underdog or like an evil character coming out to be good in the end. Next series that I enjoyed was the Sun and Moon series by Lisle. This is the first book, The Ruby Key, and this is the second book, The Silver Door. Now, I feel a little bit weird talking about the series because despite the fact that these books came out in like 2006, 2008, the third book is still not out. I know, it's been like, 12 years since that time? The series follows Genna and Dan, their siblings, as they encounter creatures called nightlings. They're a little bit like a mix between fairies and elves, soon set on a quest to save their village. I really liked this as a kid because other than like Fablehaven, it was kind of rare to find really good, interesting series about like fae creatures, even though they're called nightlings in this series. I especially love this series because one of the characters is a cat. I just love cat companions. I love this book so much that I remember every time I went to Barnes & Noble, I would run to the back of the store where they kept the kids' books, and I would always check to see if the third book in the series was out. The reason why, if you're wondering, there's no third book in the series is because I looked on the author's website. They actually canceled their publishing deal with the author, so she was kind of left stranded and had no way to write the third book in the series. The copyright has finally now been given to her, so I saw recently that she has started working on the third book in the series. So maybe, hopefully, the third book will be out, 15 years later from the original two. So the next to last series that I have to recommend is the Redwall series. I only have 2 books of this series because this is a series I exclusively read at the library. From what I can tell, there are about 22 books in this series, and I've read about 19 of those 22 books. The first couple are kind of chronological, but I think after that, it really doesn't matter what order you pick up the series in because they don't all follow one main character, but they kind of focus on different animal species and different characters. The series begins around this one structure called Redwall Abbey, where a lot of peace-loving woodland animals, mostly mice, live. Throughout the books, this peace is often threatened by other, more power-hungry animals. And since all of the main characters are basically humanized animals, they cook, they clean, they wear armor, they sing songs. It's quite a lot of fun, and they're great for the middle grade mind to get into, or even as an adult. I love rereading these books, honestly. So my favorite 2 books in the series are Hyrulean and Tagarung, which I'll put right here. These 2 books are my favorite because I really like the tropes that they embody. Tagarung is all about a character that is expected to be like the chosen one for the evil side, but then he ends up being like one of the saviors, which is a really nice twist. And then Hyrulean is just about a Princess Automaid, which I don't know about you, sounds really cool. And finally, last but certainly not least, we have the Warrior Cat series. So it would be simply impossible for me to hold up all of the Warrior Cat books in the series and all the ones I own, so I just selected a couple here. This is the series that honestly kept me going as a youngster. I absolutely loved this series. I don't know if I can stress that enough. Everything about this series was just what I was looking for in a book. They were anthropomorphic cat characters and just cat characters. You could call me an OG fan of this series. I started reading the first books before even the second installment of the series came out. This is the original book series. The first book is Into the Wild by Erin Hunter. Introduces you to the character named Rusty. Starting out, he's an orange cat that lives, is a house cat, and one day he runs across some warrior cats from the Thunder Clan. Warrior cats are comprised of 4 clans: Thunder Clan, Shadow Clan, Wind Clan, and River Clan. They live in the forest, and they have their own territories, and they follow their own code and rules, and there are often territorial spats against them, but for the most part, they tend to live in peace with each other. Anyways, the main character of the first book series, Rusty, decides to abandon his easy living as a kitty pet. Oh god. As a kitty pet, and he joins the tough, hard life of a warrior cat in the Thunder Clan. So does this book series sound cheesy? Yes. And was it cheesy? A little bit. But honestly, I really liked how it explored friendship and prejudice and bias and discrimination. There was romance between 2 cat characters, oftentimes, and it was just such a really great series for me. I loved cats, so all of the little cat mannerisms that they would do just won me over, and it has really quaint names for things in the human world, like the Thunder Path and 2 legs to call humans. The culture of the warrior cats was just so interesting to me as a kid. In the beginning part of every book, there is a genealogy of all of the different cats in the different clans, and there's also a map. And I just ate that up as a kid. After the first book series, they actually have to move to a different area to live in because deforestation comes in and wreaks havoc on their forest. It's really great because they also have a religion, and they speak to their ancestors. This is one of the first book series that I actually really started collecting avidly. Not only did I buy almost every new book when it came out in hardback, but I also bought like the companion books that like talked about the code of the clans or battle of the clans or just like the cats of the clans. And they even came out with a manga series which I bought for a while they had them. Really great. And there were also super editions that I bought as well. I was just basically totally sold on the Warrior Cat universe. If you're interested in learning more about the different book series, because I would love to talk about this with anybody, I can do another video of that. I also plan on doing a video on middle grade books that I love, not particularly series, or maybe even a part 2 or more series that I loved as a middle grader. Stay tuned for that. See you next time!